Hello and welcome to Channel 2S. I'm your host, Second Soundwave. 1 year ago, I made an introductory video to the hobby of Gunpla building, and it quickly became the most popular video on this channel with 10,000 plus views and over 100 likes. Thanks to the popularity of that video and the creation of Gunpla News, this channel exploded, gaining almost 1,000 subscribers. But looking back at the original tutorial video, I'm not exactly happy with it. There are a couple things in it that I could have explained better, and other things I left out entirely. Not to mention that it doesn't exactly fit the style of my current videos. With all those things in mind, and also in celebration of the 5-year anniversary of this channel, I decided to create the 2016 revised Total Beginner's Guide to Gundam Models. I'd like to give a big thank you to everyone who helped me get this far, and to you beginners who clicked on this video to learn about Gunpla and not hear me talk about this channel's history. Well, stay right there because the lesson begins now. To start things off, I'm going to explain some terms that you'll be hearing a lot of in both this video and in the general Gundam modeling community. The first and most important one is Gunpla. Gunpla is simply the official brand name Bandai uses for scale models of machines from the Gundam franchise. The word itself is a fusion of the words Gundam and Plomo in turn is a fusion of the words plastic and model. It's a term frequently used in Japan to refer to, well, plastic models. The second most important thing to know is what those sheets of plastic holding the parts for your Gunpla are called. Some people call them trees, trays, sprues, or plates, but the technically correct term for them is runners. In turn, the small bridges of plastic that connect the parts to the runners are called gates. The scars left by rushed or incorrect removal of the parts from the gates are referred to as gate marks, nub marks, or just nubs. The final term you need to know is polycap. Polycaps are joint parts made from a soft, grippy plastic to help the joints on the kit hold a pose easier. They're usually only used on the smaller, simpler Gunpla, but some larger kits use them sparingly. I suppose I should get some basic history out of the way as well. Gunpla are plastic models of mecha from a long-running anime series called Mobile Suit Gundam. These mecha, called mobile suits, are 18-meter humanoid war machines that are the tanks and fighter jets of the future. Originally, Bandai had trouble marketing the series they came from. Every giant robot anime at the time was a sci-fi fantasy adventure about a skyscraper-sized magical alien super robot that protects the Earth from Godzilla-like space monsters using its rocket fists and eye lasers. On the other hand, Gundam was relatively realistic. It was a war drama, it was full of emotional turmoil, tragic character deaths, and the mecha were really just the weapons that the heroes and villains used to fight. Advertising Gundam as a super robot show just didn't work well at all, and it wasn't until Bandai started making scale models of the mobile suits to appeal to military enthusiasts that the series exploded in popularity. At first, these models were rudimentary single-color figurines that had very little functionality and required loads of paint and glue to complete, but Bandai kept on making these Gunpla all through the 80s and 90s, and the quality of the kits kept improving as time went on. By the turn of the century, the line had several tiers of quality called grades, all of which were leaps and bounds ahead of those early simplistic kits. And the first thing you're going to need to understand as a Gunpla builder is what those grades mean. The most basic grade is, confusingly enough, called high grade. While they are the most basic level of Gunpla produced today, at the time they came out they were way ahead of the kits that came before them, hence them being labeled as high grades. These are the smallest, cheapest, and most basic of the graded Gunpla, but don't let that fool you into thinking that they're not worth buying. High grades usually cost around $15 to $30, depending on the size of the kit and where you buy it from, and you certainly get your money's worth. The articulation isn't the absolute best, but you generally have all the joints you need to get the kit into some cool action poses. All the basic articulation you would expect to see in a collector-grade action figure is present, plus additional joints such as double-joint elbows and knees, and swing-out shoulder joints. The front skirt is usually tied together by a bar, running through underneath the armor, but it can be split to allow independent skirt movement. However, the back skirt usually doesn't move at all. So you don't quite get a full range of movement, but there's more than enough here to get into a natural-looking pose. Almost all the parts are molded in the correct colors, including translucent pieces like visors and energy blades. You get a good variety of weapons to choose from, usually most if not all the weapons the mobile suit used in the show, and you also get alternate hands in different poses. Just don't be surprised if you see a sticker sheet to help fill out the smaller details. It is worth keeping in mind that some kits rely on stickers more heavily than others. Here, for example, is the Schwalbe Greys. Notice that only small areas like the gray directional clusters in the shoulders and the yellow stripes on the chest are the only areas that are covered by stickers. Now let's pull in the Gion for comparison. Not only are these dark purple sections on the shoulders stickers, but so is the entirety of the face, and these sections on the backpack. There are some high-grade kits that have an even heavier sticker reliance, but I generally avoid recommending them, and I'd recommend that you avoid them as well. The stickers aren't hard to apply or anything, it's just that they tend to look kind of cheap and tacky once they're on. There are hundreds and hundreds of high-grade kits, so there's way too many for you to mention all the ones with an over-reliance on stickers, but I will mention the HGBF Cubeblade Papillion, HGIBO Gundam Gujion Rebake, and HGBF Build Strike Gundam, just to name a few that have come out in recent years. And right now you might be wondering, wait, HGBF? HGIBO? What do those mean? Well, wonder no more because the explanation is really simple. Each new Gundam show since the start of the 2000s has gotten its own lineup of high-grade kits. So Gundam 00 has HG00, Gundam Build Fighters has HGBF, Gundam Iron-Blooded Orphans has HGIBO, and so on. These kits are released as the show's being aired, with new kits coming out as new mobile suits make their debut in the show. Because of this release method, most mobile suits from recent years have gotten a high-grade kit of some kind. And for the older shows that came out before the 2000s, there's high-grade Universal Century. The HGUC line is a classic series of sorts that focuses on making modernized high-grade kits of fan-favorite mobile suits from older shows that previously only got a basic, outdated kit, or just no kit at all. They haven't released everything, unfortunately, but there are currently around 200 different HGUC kits to choose from, so it's hardly a narrow selection. Recently, they have introduced a new sub-series called HGUC Revive, which is made up of redesigns of early high-grade models to bring them up to snuff with newer releases. This would also be a good time to mention that Gunpla is always steadily improving in quality, so a kit from 10 or even 5 years ago is not quite as good as a kit released recently. HG kits from 2014 onwards have experienced a big boost in quality, but that's not to say the older ones are terrible. Generally speaking, if the original release year of a kit is 2000 or later, it's going to be a pretty good kit. Anything older than that is going to have issues. Expect very restricted articulation, possibly heavy sticker reliance, and missing details on these older kits. They aren't awful, but with all the great modern kits out there to choose from, you're better off ignoring them unless there's one that really grabs your interest. Included in this era of kits are the early HGUC releases, the entirety of the HG Seed line, as well as some of the earlier HG00 releases, as that particular line varied wildly in quality. So in conclusion, get a high grade from recent years if you want to be amazed, one from 05 onwards if you just want a fun afternoon build with a solid end result, or an older one if you simply must have a particular MS in your collection. Finally, some personal recommendations. If you're looking for a starter high grade, I would strongly recommend the HGUC RX-78-2 Gundam Revive version. At around $12, it's about as cheap as they get. There are almost no stickers, and the articulation is insane. It's also the lead mobile suit from the original series, so there really is no better place to start. But if that one's too plain for your taste, I recommend the high grade Build Fighters Build Burning Gundam. It's easy to build and very posable. It doesn't have any weapons, but you get a ton of different karate hands and flame effect parts. And lastly, this one isn't a Gundam, it's another mobile suit from the series, but it's just so cool that I have to recommend it as well. This is the high-grade The Origin Char's Zaku 2. This is a kit they recommend that everyone builds, beginner or not. The detail and posability put it on par with kits of the higher grades, and only 2 stickers are used on the entire build. It truly is a marvel of engineering. Before we go on to the other grades, I'm going to take a moment to talk about scale. Scale, as you probably know, is how many times smaller a miniature representation of something is than its full-size counterpart. For example, a 1/42nd, or 1:42 as some people pronounce it, scale model of a jet would be 42 times smaller than the real-life aircraft. With Gunpla, there are 3 primary scales, 1/144th, 1/100th, and 1/60th. High-grade models are always 1/144th scale, and since mobile suits are around 18 meters to 15 feet tall in universe, most 1/144th kits are around 5 inches tall. The larger scales are generally reserved for more complex kits, such as the 1/100 scale, which is around 8 inches tall, and then 1/60th are around 10 inches, and these are just averages though, because most mobile suits are around 18 meters, but some can be 15 meters, some can be as large as 24 meters. And if 2 Gunpla of these mobile suits are in the same scale, they're going to reflect that size difference. There are a few other scales of Gunpla, like 1/200th and 1/72nd, but those have been out of use for decades and were dropped to help streamline the lineup. Now that that's all cleared up, let's get back to our discussion about grades. The next grade to talk about is Master Grade. Master Grade Gunpla are the most popular among the hardcore Gundam fans, while high grades tend to be more popular with the more casual builders. MG kits are 1/100 scale, and there's a significant quality boost to go with the size increase. Master grades have at least twice as many parts as the average high grade, and the color separation is outstanding. Stickers are almost never needed outside of the eye and sensor stickers that are present on any Gunpla regardless of grade. Instead, you get decals, a subject I'm going to go into deeper later on in this series. Back to the kits themselves, master grades are built with an inner frame that adds an extra level of detail and complexity to the kit. This frame is usually made from ABS, a hard glossy plastic that keeps the joints nice and stiff. The polyethylene joint sections of high grades work fine for smaller kits but cannot support the weight of a heavy 1/100 scale Gunpla like ABS can. And while we're talking plastics, I will mention that the plastic that the non-frame or joint sections of a mobile suit are made out of is called polystyrene, and this is important to remember if you're ever going to plan on painting a kit, since you need to make sure the paint does not react negatively with polystyrene plastic. Back to the subject of master grades, it's time to talk articulation. Master grades have all the same joints you expect to see in a high grade and then some. 180-degree elbow and knee bends, universal hips, thigh swivels, abdominal movement, that kind of stuff's always present. So is foot articulation. That's something you don't see in high grades pretty much ever. And remember how I said that most high grades have fixed back skirts? Well, not so with master grades. Even the hands are usually articulated, although the exact level of movement does vary from kit to kit. Those last couple points bring me to the final positive about master grades, and that's the mechanical features. If a mobile suit has a mechanical function like hidden fold-out weaponry or transformation, chances are the high grade emulates that function using swap-out parts. Not so on master grades. Master grades often feature functions such as removable ammo cartridges, opening panels, full transformations, gear and lever mechanisms, and other cool features. Like look here at the knee, for example, we got a nice mechanical mechanism right here. And even if the kit doesn't have any of those, the opening cockpit hatch is always present on even the oldest of master grades, and there's even a tiny little pilot way up in there. It's this insane attention to detail that makes the master grade so popular. But these kits are not without their downsides. For starters, they're expensive. Although a few can be gotten for $35 to $40, most of them regularly go up into the $50 range, and it's not at all uncommon to see them go higher. Most of this price bump does, of course, come from the large number of pieces you get, but another factor comes from just having to import these monstrosities. I mean, seriously, look at this box. It's enormous. And this isn't even one of the big ones. The biggest strike against the master grade line, however, is the limited selection. Like I said earlier, master grades are expensive. As a result, Bandai is more cautious about what they release at the grade, since they'd rather not have a big pile of expensive unsold master grades lying around. So if your favorite mobile suit comes from a show like X, Victory, G, or Reconquista that Bandai has decided doesn't sell, then there's a good chance that it has no master grade kit to its name, and probably never will. Bandai has also severely cut down on new master grade releases over the last couple years, which narrows the selection even further. I personally wouldn't recommend a master grade to a beginner, but they really don't require any more skill to build than a high grade, and I'm sure someone watching this wants to start big, so I'll mention a couple anyways. The Gundam X is a pretty easy master grade and is also on the cheaper end, and thus is one you'll often see recommended to beginning builders by the general Gunpla community. The only other things I'll add are that A, you should be careful with the backpack connection since it's made out of a soft plastic that can break easily, and B, it tends to have weight and balance issues thanks to its enormous satellite cannon. Another one I'd recommend is the Wing Gundam Proto Zero. It's a pretty solid basic master grade that isn't too challenging to build, and as for ones I've built personally that I recommend, you can't go wrong with the Build Strike Gundam. There are actually several kits that use its basic body mold, and most of them are awesome, but if I had to choose just one to single out, it would be the Build Strike for sure. Oh, and if you want to keep your sanity intact, I'd recommend steering clear from the Victory, Unicorn, and all variants of them. Both kits are flimsy, over-engineered disasters with perfectly fine high grades that can be bought instead. And finally, I will mention that older master grades are, as with older high grades, not up to the same level of quality as their modern brethren. Also, like with the high grades, 2005 is around where they went up in quality. So that's master grade, but if you want the complexity and detail combined with affordability, all at the same scale of a high grade line, then it's time to get real. Real grade is the most recent grade to be added to Gunpla, and it's a great example of the crazy feats of engineering that Bandai can now achieve. Real grades are at the 1/144th scale, and yet in some ways they are more complex than a master grade. There are loads of sculpted details, even more so than some MGs have. As the name suggests, real grades focus less on anime accuracy and more on making the design look as detailed and realistic as possible, like a live-action movie redesign. There's a few things they do to accomplish this, and one of these is multi-toned armor. On a high-grade or master-grade kit, there's usually only one shade of white, one shade of blue, and so on for the entire kit. Real grades don't do that. Take a closer look at the Astray I have in front of me. At first glance, it looks like it's just red and white, but take a closer look and you realize that some of the white parts are actually a very light gray like the top of the shoulder. And a few of the red sections in the frame are actually a darker red than the rest. This two-tone color palette is one of the signature features of a real grade. The next real grade signature is its unique inner frame. On a master grade Gunpla, the inner frame is what you spend most of your time building, as it's made of many individual parts. But building an inner frame that complex at 1/144th scale would be tremendously difficult, so Bandai found a way around it. The frame for an RG comes pre-molded in fully articulated sections right there on the runner. There's nothing more mind-warping than cutting a complete leg frame off the runner all at once, and then watching all the joints bend and shift as you move it around. All those shifting parts have a purpose, and that purpose is the third real grade signature feature. If you look at a live-action mecha movie like Transformers or Pacific Rim, you'll probably notice that as the robots move their limbs, the armor panels tend to shift and move around the joints, giving them a more fluid, organic feel. The RG frame does the same thing. As you move the leg or arm of a real grade, the armor sections will shift around, covering up the joints to keep them protected. Other sections like kneecaps might fan open, revealing interior detail. This is something that master grades only do to a lesser extent, and high grades don't do at all. But you do have to be careful, as the inner frame can break if you move it too roughly. There's a lot of small moving parts in here, and if something jams up, it could be disastrous. And that's really the only con of the real grade, is that you have to be careful with them. You have to deal with minuscule parts, smaller than those you'd find in any other grade as you're building the kit. After you cut out the frame, you have to gently break in the joints before you start adding the armor. And after everything's built, you still have to make sure you slowly move the joints so nothing breaks. And then there's the marking sheet. Every real grade Gunpla comes with a massive sheet of clear acrylic stickers of near microscopic detail accents. They're very small, there are loads of them, and it's very, very hard to get them on right. If you're building real grades your first Gunpla, I strongly recommend that you just not bother with the marking stickers, as there's enough color separation on the plastic alone to give you a great end result from just a straight build. Articulation on real grades is more or less the same as what you'd see on a master grade, and price-wise they're almost all around $25. It's a relatively new grade, so there's not a lot of selection with only around 20 different kits to choose from. And personally I wouldn't recommend any of them to a beginner, even more so than a master grade, but if you absolutely must get one, I do recommend the Gundam Mark II. It comes in both white and blue variants, and it's the most solid one out of the bunch. The final and most complicated grade is perfect grade. Perfect grades are bigger than almost any other Gunpla at 1/60th scale. They're far more complex than even a master grade, although they aren't always as articulated as one. They have incredibly detailed inner frames and a lot of opening hatches so you can still see the frame once the armor's on. Pistons and other mechanical accents are sometimes made from metal, and LEDs are always present. The only real downside to them is that they are expensive. The smaller, older perfect grades are around $100 to $150, and the newer ones regularly hit and surpass the $200 mark. Because of the complexity and price of these kits, I personally would not recommend any of them to a beginner, but if you must start big, it doesn't get any bigger than this. During the history segment of this video, I mentioned that the grading system was introduced well after the start of Gunpla. The kits from before the introduction of grades are unofficially referred to as no grades, and are not really worth bothering with unless you're an experienced customizer. Their color separation is poor, proportions are all over the place, details are mushy, and they have minimal articulation. They all come in 3 scales, as well as a couple others that are now out of use. Be wary of speed grade, first grade, advanced grade, and entry grade kits as well, as they are just failed attempts by Bandai to bring back no grade level Gunpla into the modern era. However, not all of these attempts are worth ignoring. The HG lines for Seed and 00 were accompanied by ungraded 1/100 model lines that were actually above the quality of high grades at that time. As far as I understand, their biggest flaw is that the joints can sometimes loosen up over time, so they still weren't great or anything like that, but they're often your best option when it comes to the mobile suits of Seed, Destiny, and 00 Season 1. They aren't reprinted as often as the graded kits though, so you might have some trouble tracking a few of them down. But if you still want to try your hand at bigger Gunpla without the complexity of the Master Grade line, then you're in luck because Bandai has been modernizing the concept of No Grade 100 in the last couple years. This new generation of No Grade started with the Reborn 100 line, usually shortened to Re100, which is a venue for Bandai to release the most oddball and obscure designs in the Gundam universe without having to pour the same amount of R&D money that would be needed for a Master Grade. There are only a small handful of models in the Re100 series at the moment, but they're all pretty solid beginner kits. Well, other than the Nightingale. Just don't get the Nightingale. If you want to build something that's possibly more familiar, the new generation No Grades extend past Re100 into the most current Gundam series, Iron-Blooded Orphans. The 100 IBO line more or less consists of scaled-up versions of the HG IBO kits, with more surface detail and slightly better color separation. Most of the primary suits from the show are present in the line, and they have slightly less stickers than their HG counterparts. Do you remember how I said the perfect grades were bigger than almost every other Gunpla? Well, all the exceptions come from the Mega Size series. These kits are at the 1/48th scale, clocking in at over a foot tall. They've got some nice surface detail, but they're very simple, even more so than smaller high grades. As a result, they aren't really that impressive. Articulation is pretty basic, as they're mostly just meant for young children to want a jumbo-sized version of their favorite Gundam. That is, as long as their favorite Gundam is either the classic Gundam, one of the Zaku's, the Age 1, or the Age 2, because those are the only mobile suits ever to get a Mega Size. Unless you really want a giant Gundam, I wouldn't recommend these kits to anyone, as they're a much better Gunpla they can get for the same amount of money. There's one more kind of No Grade out there that I'll cover in this tutorial, and that's the SD, or Super Deformed series. These cute little guys are designed in a chibi style, and they're very simple to build. The line's been going on steadily since the 1980s, and there's over 400 SDs to choose from. In addition to canonical Gundam designs, there are also SD Gundam Samurai, Knights, and other such redesigns. Since they've only got a couple small runners of parts usually, a lot of the colored areas are filled in with stickers, and the backs of the limbs and other areas are usually hollowed out. This means they won't look super amazing after a stock build, but they're great for practicing your customizing skills on, since most of them are less than $10. A few of them are a bit more expensive, but those bigger kits usually have a transformation or some other fun gimmick. Then there's SDX Standard. X Standard kits are designed to all be the same price point and serve as kind of a 2.0 series for the SD line. Sounds awesome, except that really none of them are better than their older counterparts. In fact, several of them are objectively worse. Take the Unicorn, for example. On the X Standard kit, several of the red sections are stickers, the beam sabers in the backpack are black instead of the correct white, the hands are white instead of gray, and it's permanently in destroy mode. Now let's take a look at the first SD Unicorn they made. Pretty much all the red areas are plastic parts, the beam sabers and hands are molded in the correct colors, and the feet have proper color separation instead of stickers, and the backs of the legs aren't hollowed out. Oh yeah, and it actually transforms. It also does this. I really have no idea what this is, but the X Standard sure can't do it. The X Standard line may be a bizarre waste of Bandai resources, but the kits themselves are very cheap and sometimes easier to find than the older ones. I'd still recommend the regular SDs over them though. At this point, you may very well be wondering how you're going to keep track of all this, how you're going to be able to figure out what mobile suits have been made at what grade, how old they are, or what accessories they come with. Well, there's this really useful resource called Dalong.net. Dalong.net is a website run by this Korean guy that has built literally every Gunpla that's ever been made, and he took detailed photo galleries of each one of them. In fact, many of the images I used for this very video came from Dalong.net. The text parts of his reviews are in Korean, but there are enough detailed images to give you a pretty solid idea of what a kit will be like before you buy it. Then if you want an even clearer look at the kit you're getting, you could check out a video review of said kit on a YouTube channel such as this one. By the way, now is a great time to subscribe if you aren't already. Leave a like if this helped you choose your first Gundam model kit, and if you're still not sure what to start with, or you're just curious about a particular model, feel free to ask away in the comments section below. I've also added some extra information in the video description, so check that out as well. Originally this was going to be just one long video, like the first iteration of this tutorial, but I've chosen to split it into several segments for easier viewing. Next time on the Total Beginner's Guide to Gundam Models, we'll go over all the tools you should have and how to use them, but until then, I'm Second Soundwave, and I'll see you next time.